Hi, Gators. We're back at it today, and we will be looking at equivalent fractions again. But if we want to connect it to our prior learning, before when we did equivalent fractions, we were using models and drawing the same model, dividing it into different number of parts, and then shading in the same amount of each model or fraction strip to find an equivalent fraction. Today, we're going to find equivalent fractions using a new strategy, and that is a number line. So this will be our guided practice. I'm going to walk you through some examples, maybe pause, let you fill some of it in on your own. So the directions say label the two number lines below with fractions. And if I look at this number line, I've got 1, 2, 3 equal parts. That means thirds. So I'm going to use my text feature here. This one will be 1/3, and this one will be 2/3. Okay. Now my next number line, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 equal parts. 6 equal parts means the unit I'm using is sixth. So I'm going to, again, label each point on the number line. Really important for you to do that when you're finding equivalent fractions. So 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and then this would be 6/6. Okay, and I could label that there and draw a box around it if I want. That's a whole number fraction. Okay, really important for you to understand that. And if I wanted to go back here, this would be 0/6 as well. Okay. When you're looking for equivalent fractions on a number line, boys and girls, you're looking for fractions that are at the same spot or are the same distance from zero. So when I compare these two number lines, I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say, gee, these two fractions right here are at the same spot. And I can circle them. They're here and here. They're at the same spot on the number line, aren't they? So my equivalent fractions would be 1/3 and 2/6. Do you find two other fractions when you look at the two number lines? They're at the same spot. That's right, right here. 2/3 and 4/6 are also at the same spot. So on this number line, we actually have two sets of equivalent fractions. The other thing you can do is you can say how far they are from zero. So 1/3 is this far from zero, and 2/6 is also the same distance from zero. Okay, the same spot from zero. But it's kind of nice to look at them and line the number lines up. Notice my zeros are in the same spot, my ones are in the same spot, and I have divided my number lines into equal parts. All of those are really important strategies to use if you want to find equivalent fractions. So my very first equivalent fraction that I found on my number line then was 1/3, which is right up here. And we can say 1/3 is equivalent to or equal to 2/6. Right? And remember what we found when we were doing it with models. What we did here is we just doubled each part. We doubled the numerator and we doubled the denominator. All right. Now let's look at our next one. The other one we found was 2/3 is equivalent to or equal to 4/6. So I will write that in this equality here. 2/3 is equal to or equivalent to 4/6. And there are my two fractions that I found on these two sets of number lines. Right, I'm going to erase. We'll go down to the next set of number lines. So here we have two number lines again. If you can remember what we do first to identify our unit. That's exactly right. We count the number of parts. So we got, let's just make a little dot here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equal parts between 0 and 1. That means my unit is eighths. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in each one of those. This would be 0/8 right here. And I could box that because it's a whole number fraction. Next would be 1/8. And go ahead and do that on your own with your paper. 5/8, 6/8, that's 7/8. And then last but not least, I could put 8/8 over here. It's my whole number fraction. It represents the whole number 1. All right. Count the number of equal parts on your second number line. That's right. There's 4 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means my unit is correct. My unit is fourths. So again, I'm going to label each spot on my number line. We'll start with 0/4. You can go ahead and do that as well. This box, we're going to put 1/4. This box, we're going to put 2/4. This box, we will put 3/4. And this box here, right next to 1 whole, we will put 4/4, whole number fraction. So remember what we do. We're looking for the fractions that are at the same point on the number line. And hopefully now you're starting to realize how important it is that our zeros are lined up and that our ones are lined up and that our fraction, our units are drawn all in equal size. So if I'm looking for the ones that are the same point on the number line, they're the ones that are above each other. So I would say 2/8 and 1/4, I can draw the circle around them. They are at the same point on a number line. Can you find another set of fractions that look like that? Same point on the number line. That's exactly right. 4/8 and 2/4 are also at the same point on the number line. And there's one more. Yep, another one would be 6/8 and 3/4. Now, if you're really good, there's a couple more fractions that are equivalent here that you could find. Give you a minute to think about that. That's right, boys and girls. 0/8 and 0/4 are at the same point, which means that 8/8 and 4/4 are also at the same point on the number line. So when the question says use the number lines above to identify 2 sets of equivalent fractions, we actually have identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets of equivalent fractions. So you can go ahead and write down the ones that you would like to. I'm going to go ahead and put 2/8 is equivalent to or equal to 1/4. And then over here, just to mix it up a little bit, I could put 4/8 is equal to 2/4. I could put 6/8 is equal to 3/4, but I'm going to put 8/8 is equal to 4/4. So again, equivalent fractions when you're using a number line are at the same point on the number line. Best way to do it is draw the number lines underneath one another. Make sure your zeros and your ones are in the same spot. Okay, I'm going to clear this and we're going to go to the next page. All right, and I'm going to give you a minute to do the next one on your own. It says label the 2 number lines below with fractions. Use the number lines above to identify 1 pair of equivalent fractions. Hopefully you found the first number line was divided into 2 equal parts. That means our unit is halves. So here we would have 0/2. Here we would have 1/2. And here we would have 2/2. Now, shame on me. I really liked the way you guys, when you were doing some of your work on your own, you were remembering to box your whole number fractions. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. All right, let's look at the second number line. Hopefully what you thought to yourself, there are 4 equal parts, so that means I have fourths. And you hopefully went ahead and labeled your fractions there. So we had 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and last but not least, 4/4. Okay. Now that we have our fractions labeled, it should be pretty easy for us to find that equivalent fraction. And most of you hopefully saw this, that 1/2 and 2/4 were the same point on the number line. They're right above one another here, same distance from 0. So I could write my equivalent fraction down here that I found, and I would write 1/2 is equivalent or equal to 2/4. And now you see why the number of parts doubles. Okay, here I had 2 equal parts in one whole. Here I have 4 equal parts in one whole. So notice that the total number of parts doubled. So the number of parts we're looking at when we're finding equivalent fractions from 1/2 to 2/4 would double. Okay, I have 2/4 in this distance. Here I only have 1/2. All right, now we're going to put you to work. That you will be assessed on being able to do this independently. So it's really important to pay attention to this next step. It says draw and label 2 number lines below, circle the fractions that are equivalent. So let's draw 2 number lines, and remember what Mrs. Reed said is so important. It is really important to make sure your zeros are lined up and your ones are lined up. I'm going to draw my number line from here to here. And then underneath it, I'm going to draw an identical number line. Okay. And let's see, why don't we try thirds on our first number line? So that means 3 equal parts. So let's go ahead and, I guess, first of all, let's make sure that we have our zeros in the same spot. So notice I'm working really hard to line my zeros up. I'm going to put 1 at this end. So I'm going to put my tick marks and line my ones up. And then I guess I'm going to go ahead and label those with 0. Whoops. Not sure what happened there, boys and girls. Somehow got my mail up there. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, going back, this would be 0 here. And then at the other end would be your 1. So our endpoints on these number lines are 0 and 1 for both of them. And remember what I said, we're going to divide the first number line into thirds. That means 3 equal parts, and that means 2 lines. So there's a line there. I'm going to try my best to make them equal. There's a line there. I have 3 equal parts. So this would be 0 thirds here, 1 third here, 2 thirds here, whoops, and then 3 thirds at the end. And I'm going to box those whole number fractions, the one at 0 and the one at 1. And our examples above that the worksheet gave us, they had boxed all the fractions. So now it makes a little more sense to us. Okay. It's 3 thirds. Make sure you see that 3 thirds there. All right. Now I need to find an equivalent fraction. So remember what we did before when we were folding fraction strips and we had thirds, we could double it and make sixths. Same thing when we were doing fractions with models. We could take a fraction strip and make it into thirds and then split those thirds in half and find an equivalent fraction. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to split this into thirds, but we don't want thirds again. So we want to make a different unit. So we're going to split each one of these in half. And you can already kind of see where we're going to find our equivalent fractions because those tick marks on our number line are already lined up. So I had thirds on the first number line. I doubled the number of equal parts. So now I have 6. So I'm going to go ahead and label all my fractions. You can do the same. 0, 6, 1 6, 2 6, 3 6, 4 6, 5 6, and last but not least 6 6. And go ahead and box your whole number fractions, boys and girls. All right, now our directions said to draw and label 2 number lines below and then circle the equivalent fractions. So here we go. I'm looking at the fractions that are at the same point on the number line, and I can circle them because they're right above each other. So 1 third and 2 6 are equivalent fractions. And then over here, 2 thirds and 4 6 are equivalent fractions. Same point on the number line. The only difference is the bottom number line is divided into twice as many parts. So instead of 3 equal parts, we have 6 equal parts. So you need 2 6 in order to equal 1 third. All right, the last part says, how do you know the fractions in your number line are equivalent? Give an example to help explain your reasoning. Well, so what we're saying, the reason we're finding them to be equivalent is because they're at the same point on the number line. So we can say, I know my fractions are equivalent because they are at the same point on the number line. That's really the main strategy for finding fractions on a number line. You just want to find fractions that are at the same point on the number line. I hope you can see that a little better there. Okay, we could also say they're the same distance from 0, because that is certainly true if we look at this. This one is this far from 0, and this one is this far from 0, so they are the same distance. If we measured that, they would be the same distance. Okay, and then it did ask us to give an example. So we're going to write for our example. We'll write, for example, on the number lines above, 1/3 and 2/6 are at the same point on the. All right, boys and girls, that's fractions on a number line. The one thing that I really hope you take away from this, besides the fact that fractions are the same point on the number line, when you are finding them, this is the most important part. Make sure your zeros are lined up just like we did here. Make sure those zeros are lined up right here. Really important those are lined up. Make sure your ones are lined up. And then make sure you have equal parts. And if you're starting with thirds and you want to find equivalent fractions, go down, make your thirds, and then just split your parts in half. If you're starting with halves on your first line, make your half up here, make your half at the bottom, and then split your halves in half. And that will help you find equivalent fractions. All right, boys and girls, I hope that you found that helpful, and we'll be doing more work. You have some independent practice on equivalent fractions as well.